Hello, friends. We're being told these days that the Bible's account of creation is not reliable. Just a myth, some say. Man is a product of evolution, they claim. Is it reasonable to believe that the earth and all things in it were created in 6 days? What do you think? In this presentation, these points will be discussed. With me to present some of the thoughts are Mr. Edward Fay, Bible scholar and lecturer, and Mr. Norman Woodworth, associate editor of the Dawn magazine.
And Mr. Russell Pollock, our moderator.
Thank you. But first, we will listen to a discussion between a devoted Christian gentleman and his son. A son who has lost his faith in the Bible as a result of the teachings of evolution. While the son was home from college on vacation, they talked these things over, and now the father is visiting his son at college.
Well, Dad, come on in. I'm glad you could visit me at school. Oh, this is my pal, Harry.
Oh, Harry. Mr. Rogers?
Hi, was the room I got for you okay?
Oh, just fine, Tom.
Sorry classes interfered with my picking you up at the airport, but I was afraid that was going to happen, so I sent you the address of your room.
Taxi service was good. I had no trouble at all.
Here, have a seat.
Thank you.
Dad, I was telling Harry about some of the things we talked about concerning the Bible the last time I was home. He, wanted to meet you.
Well, Tom, as you know, I'm ready to discuss the Bible with anyone.
Harry, you take it from here. Tell Dad what your viewpoint is concerning the Bible and evolution. I must say, Dad, it sounds logical to me.
Harry, go ahead. As they say, I'm all ears.
You both put me on the spot. Well, you see, like Tom, I have little faith in the Bible as the inspired word of God. I realize that its stories are merely allegories, having no foundation in fact.
Well, now, wait a minute, Harry. Haven't you assumed a great deal to begin with?
Well, don't worry, Mr. Rogers. I'll strike a happier note in a moment. See, I was distressed when I found that my studies in geology and anthropology were upsetting my faith in the Bible. But then I talked to some good friends who have great respect for the Bible, and they told me not to worry, that I could believe in both evolution and the Bible, and that I need not give up the Bible in order to believe in human evolution.
You see, Dad, it's a new angle, and it appeals to me very much. It gave me the idea that maybe you and I could again read the Bible together and enjoy it, even though you don't believe in the theory of evolution.
Boys, this is not a new angle at all. It was presented to me years ago. There are many serious men and women who still hold to it.
But it doesn't sound good to you, Dad.
Whether or not an idea sounds good is not the point. We're interested in the truth.
But that sounded like the truth to me, Mr. Rogers. Well, you take the story of Adam and Eve. Now, isn't that just too crude to be a statement of fact?
Watch yourself, Harry, or Dad will be asking you if the evolutionists' theory about wiggling protoplasm coming to life doesn't sound rather fanciful.
Now, don't you anticipate me, young man. But, Harry, to get back to your question about Adam and Eve, why should the story of the creation be fanciful? After all, the whole story is only expressed in a few words. I'm sure if all the details were filled in, it would be perfectly logical to all of us.
Well, now, don't misunderstand me, Mr. Rogers. I think that there's much in the Bible that is very real, especially in the New Testament. Now, the teachings of Jesus are okay. And the writings of the apostles, well, they're down to earth and reasonable, to the extent that we understand them. But those Old Testament legends, now there's no reason to believe that they're true.
Well, Harry, it's nice of you to acknowledge that the teachings of Jesus can be relied upon.
Well, I think Harry's always ready to acknowledge the truth, Dad.
Well, good. And the truth is that Jesus, throughout his ministry, frequently referred to Noah and the flood, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. He often mentioned Old Testament characters like Lot's wife, Abraham, Moses, Solomon, and David.
I can hardly believe that.
Oh, but it's true nonetheless. And Jesus put his stamp of approval on the Old Testament prophecies by frequently referring to them. Now, you may think that the story of the flood is a legend, but Jesus believed that it was real. And you just said that Jesus spoke the truth.
I told you to watch out, Harry.
Well, I'm not concerned, Tom. After all, I want the truth. I want the truth more than anything else in life.
Now, I realize that, Harry. So do I. Go ahead, Dad.
All right. I don't think we should overlook the findings of the archaeologists in the last 50 years or so. They have been, and they are now, digging up proofs that the Old Testament people and their experiences were not fantasies, but real. Now, in 1932, a noted French scientist who, he had a series of syndicated articles published here in America on the age of the human race. And he said, before science is through poking around in caves and sea bottoms, it may prove that there's considerable truth in that fall of man legend.
But now, he did call it a legend.
Yes, but he was beginning to wonder about it. Now, many of the ancient cities that modernists said never existed except in legend have been discovered. Ur of Chaldees, for example. That was the home of Abraham. And that's just one example. Right now, practically all of the once disputed stories and records of the Old Testament have been proven true by the archaeologist Spade. And they're still making wonderful discoveries.
Well, that means that Jesus made no mistake in referring to the Old Testament personalities and their experiences. You know, it's odd that while I've been aware of many of the wonderful discoveries of the archaeologists, I've never related them to the teachings of Jesus.
Well, I think that Harry thinks that the teachings, the writings of the New Testament apostles are quite reliable.
Yeah, that's right, Mr. Rogers, I do.
Good. In Hebrews, chapter 2, verses 7 and 8, the Apostle Paul quotes an Old Testament reference to the original creation of man in the image of God, and to the fact that he was given dominion over the earth.
Which means that Paul believed in the Genesis account of creation, right?
Right. Now, in Paul's letter to the church in Corinth, he refers to Adam, mentioning him by name. And he says, as in Adam all die, even so in Christ shall all be made alive.
Well, it's clear that Paul was not an evolutionist. Wouldn't you say so, Harry?
Well, I don't have to say it. Obviously, Paul believed that man was falling, not evolving. But his statement that all will be made alive in Christ, now that intrigues me. What did Paul mean by that?
Well, in a word, that Christ gave his life to redeem fallen man from death. And throughout his kingdom on earth, all would be given the opportunity to be restored to life through a resurrection.
Well, does the Bible's teaching of resurrection then rule out the theory of evolution?
Now, what do you think, Harry? Look, if man is an evolving creature, then to restore him to a former condition would be a calamity. Now, there's just one reason why you cannot believe in human evolution and the Bible at the same time.
But what about the fact that Jesus and Paul and others of the New Testament evidently had faith in the records of the Old Testament?
Here again is another reason why you have to accept the Bible in its entirety or reject it altogether. Now, if the Old Testament stories and records, including the Genesis account of creation, are fantasies and allegories, well, then Jesus and Paul were duped.
Well, what do you think about it now, Harry?
Well, certainly I can see the logic of your father's argument. But I'm still not convinced that the Genesis account of creation can be taken seriously. I'm thinking at the moment of the idea expressed in the first chapter of Genesis, that the universe was created in 6 days. Now, certainly the astronomers and geologists have proven that to be false.
Dad, you gave me a brief explanation of that in a previous discussion, remember?
boys, this is not something I figured out for myself. I was watching television one day, and there was a panel discussion going on, and the subject was the days of creation. And that was a great day for me. I remember that discussion very well.
What I want to know is how the whole universe could possibly be created in 6 days. Scientists, I believe, have concluded that this was a work of millions of years.
Russell, the Bible does not say the earth was created in 6 days. The very first verse of the Bible says that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. And the next verse says, and the earth was without form and void. Thus the creation of the earth is described and no time period is mentioned. Whatever the scientists may conclude as to how much time was required for this work of creation, they would not be out of harmony with the Bible, for the Bible does not give the time.
I see. But 6 days are mentioned in that chapter. Is that not so?
That is true, Russell. But the developments described as taking place during those 6 days is not the creation of the earth, but the preparation of the earth to sustain life, particularly human life. The record states that to begin with, the earth was without form and empty, and that darkness was upon the face of the deep.
But even so, 6 days would seem like a short time to transform the whole earth from a dark, empty waste to the state in which we find it today.
Well, there's really no problem there, Russell. The word day is used in the Bible to describe periods of time of various lengths. The Hebrew word here used is elsewhere translated year and season and time. Literally, it simply means a period of time, the length of which has to be determined not by the meaning of the word, but by the context in which it appears.
You see, Russell, we use the word day in much the same manner. We speak of Lincoln's Day, of Washington's Day, and so forth. The Bible speaks of the 40 years of Israel's wandering in the wilderness as the day of temptation in the wilderness.
I see, I get the point. The 6 days of creation were 6 periods of time, or epochs.
That's exactly right. And the beginning and ending of these periods are designated as the evening and the morning.
You know, that's very odd. Our days begin in the morning, not in the evening.
That's true, Russell, but these days of creation had a dark, obscure beginning, properly described as evening, and the brightness of the morning well illustrates the development of each of those eras of time as having reached a satisfactory conclusion.
Russell, suppose I read what occurred during the first day.
Very good.
This is in Genesis 1, 3 through 5. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw the light, and it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day.
Well, it would seem from that it was in the first day, or epoch, that God said, let there be light. What was that light?
The most reasonable conclusion is that it was the light of the sun. However, at that time, the earth was doubtless surrounded by vaporous gases which hindered the light of the sun from reaching the earth in all the brilliance that it does today, but sufficient, nevertheless, to separate the darkness from the light. This naturally occurred with the rotation of the earth.
That's very good. But what was accomplished during the second creative epoch, or day? Ed, would you read that for us, please, from the Bible?
Gladly, and that's also in the first chapter of Genesis. And God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And God made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day.
Ed, I think that calls for an explanation.
Well, as the scriptures indicate, when the work of the 6 creative days began, the earth was covered with water and was wrapped in darkness. So the work of the second creative day was to create a firmament of air above this vast planet-wide sea. Evidently, this was done by the power of evaporation and the pressure of gases which forced a canopy of water into suspension far above the earth.
And Russell, the word firmament simply means air, so we might say that it was during this epoch that the air was created. Scientists tell us that in all probability it was the spewing out of the gases from under the Earth's surface through innumerable craters which opened up under pressure that formed the vast ocean that covered the Earth in the beginning, the gas condensing into water as it cooled. But some of this gas did not condense, and through the overruling of the Creator became our atmosphere.
And Russell, the prophet Isaiah wrote concerning the Creator, "It is he that sitteth on the circle of the earth, that stretcheth out the heavens as a curtain, and spreadeth them out as a tent to dwell in."
What a beautiful way of describing the expansive atmosphere that surrounds the earth. It is as a tent in which we dwell. And truly, every living creature on earth does live in this oxygen tent. Mr. Woodworth, would you read the account of the next creative epoch for us, please?
That would be the third. The record states, "And God said, Let the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, Let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth. And it was so. And the earth brought forth grass and herbs yielding seed after his kind, and the tree yielding fruit, whose seed was in itself after his kind. And God saw that it was good. And the evening and the morning were the third day."
From that you can see, Russell, that it was during the third day that the land surface of the earth appeared. Obviously, by divine decree and under the control of divine power, there began a buckling of the earth's surface, which was as yet a somewhat soft crust, and also deepening the ocean beds and heaving up our continents. The Lord speaks of establishing the boundaries of the ocean, saying, "Hitherto shalt thou come, but no further, and here shall thy proud ways be stayed."
Well, there seems truly to have been a very orderly progress in what the Genesis record describes.
Very true. And Russell, it was in the third epoch that vegetation began to appear. And I would like you to note the expression, "after its kind." This is the Bible's way of describing fixity of species. Dr. Darwin, in his book, Origin of Species, admits that in spite of all the efforts of trained observers, not one change of species into another is on record.
The vegetation of the third creative epoch was not of the refined variety that appeared later, such as trees bearing edible fruit. That era embraced what scientists describe as the Carboniferous and early Permian periods. It was at this time that the rank vegetation, growing up into veritable forests, furnished the material for the coal deposits of the earth.
That sounds very good. What about the fourth creative day or epoch? What was the outstanding development during that period?
Concerning the fourth epoch, the Bible states, "And God said, Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. And let them be for lights in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth." And it was so. And God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. And God set them in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And the evening and the morning were the fourth day.
Russell, this is not a reference to the creation of the sun and the moon. These had been created long before. The Hebrew word here translated made is rendered appointed in the 104th Psalm, verse 19. And there the psalmist informs us that God appointed the moon for seasons. It would seem that prior to the fourth day, the rings of vapor water that surrounded the earth prevented the rays of the sun and the moon from penetrating sufficiently to rule the day and to control the seasons, although some light got through prior to this, for some light would be needed for the vegetation that appeared in the third day.
Well, these truths are interesting. What about the fifth day, though? What took place during that period of time?
That epoch was devoted to the bringing forth of marine life, and also the fowl that fly above the earth. Mention of whales is made. Professor Strong informs us that the Hebrew word here translated whales could just as properly be rendered land monsters. It was during this fifth epoch that those prehistoric giants known as dinosaurs and others were created.
And now we've come to the sixth day or epoch. What took place then?
Well, it was during the sixth day that land animals which were to contribute to human needs were created. And finally, near the close of that era, man himself was created. Man, of course, was the crowning feature of God's earthly creation.
And I am impressed, Russell, with the thought of how wonderful was the timing of the various orders of creation as outlined in the Bible. And the record of the rocks reveals the same sequence.
I believe that certain details are given concerning man's creation which are not furnished with respect to the creation of the lower animals. That is true, isn't it?
Indeed it is. For one thing, we're informed that man was created in the image of God. This means that he could reason, that he had the ability to know right from wrong. God asked Job, you remember, if he knew who put wisdom in the inward parts, and who it was that gave understanding to the heart.
And those who believe in evolution instead of creation really have no answer to that question. Since the Creator gave our first parents the ability to know right from wrong, it was proper that he give them a standard of right and wrong, which he did. To the lower animals there was no forbidden fruit, but for man there was. And we know that the penalty for doing wrong was death. In the day thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die, the Creator said.
And we all know that Adam did disobey God's law, and that the sentence of death fell upon him.
But you recall, Russell, the fallen Lucifer accused God of lying about the penalty for sin. He told Mother Eve that death would not result from disobedience. And she was deceived by this falsehood, and the majority of mankind since have been deceived by it. This is really the beginning of the theory that there is no death.
Yes, that is true. Death is a terrible thing, and it is easy to see why so many would try to deny its reality. However, the Bible does hold out a hope of life beyond the grave, does it not?
By all means, Russell. God has promised to use his mighty power to restore the dead to life in what the Bible calls a resurrection. The Apostle Peter refers to it as restitution or restoration, and says that the hope of restoration had been set forth by all God's holy prophets since the world began.
You see, Russell, while God condemned his human creation to death, he still loved the people and provided redemption and recovery for them through Jesus. And during the present age, those who follow faithfully in Jesus' steps of sacrifice are promised exaltation with him in the heavenly realm, and they will live and reign with him in his 1,000-year kingdom. The function of that kingdom will be to restore the remainder of mankind to perfect human life right here on the earth.
Which reminds us of the Lord's statement to the effect that he did not create the earth in vain, but formed it to be inhabited. Yes, there is hope for those who have died, a glorious hope. Loved ones will be reunited in that glorious kingdom of the Messiah.
Which is really a wonderful thing to contemplate. And friends, this is just one of the reassurances given to us in the book Science and Creation. In our discussion of the days of creation, we have had to be very brief, but the little book Science and Creation fills in many interesting and faith-strengthening details. Science and Creation presents the facts of creation in language which both scientists and non-scientists understand and appreciate. Science and Creation contains a number of revealing illustrations. It presents the thrilling truths of the Bible concerning the birth of the oceans, the foundations of the earth, and its main cornerstone. This is a hope-inspiring book which young and old will read over and over again.
To view the booklet online, visit www.dawnbible.com, or to receive a hard copy of the booklet by mail, send us your name and postal mailing address and ask for the booklet by name. The title of the booklet for this program is Science and Creation. Send an email to dawnbible@aol.com. The booklet will be mailed to you free and without obligation. And now, goodbye, and may God bless you.